Hi, everyone. I am excited to be talking with Radha Ruparell today. She has an extensive background working with top leaders, including CEOs, Fortune 500 executives. She's currently the head of the Global Leadership Accelerator at Teach for All. It's a global network of organizations in more than 60 countries committed to developing collective leadership to ensure all children fulfill their potential. Radha's got a great background. Prior to Teach for All, she worked at McKinsey. She's a graduate of Harvard Business School, Harvard Kennedy School, and is also the author of Brave Now. So much to listen and learn from you, Radha. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Annalisa. Excited for this conversation.
Radha, you and I met through a program on leadership and consciousness and how to integrate all parts of ourselves, including the head, the heart, the soul. I'm curious as you reflect on those days, is anything staying with you? Because this is a few years back.
Yeah, such a good question. I loved meeting you through that. And the work we were doing there was just around deep listening. And I think the biggest thing that I learned from that experience was in order to listen to others, we first have to learn to listen to ourselves. And I think in this go, 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 crazy, busy world, we don't create enough time and space for that. So that's just one thing that I've taken away and I'm practicing all the time now. Take a moment, pause, and listen to myself. And I try to encourage others to do the same as well.
As much as both of us are in the professional development, training, leadership, support space, it's fascinating that I think the listening course you and I did together with Bhavana is maybe the only listening course I've ever done in my very long, in our long careers. How about you?
Yeah, it's incredible. You know, Annalise, I think about that because I work in education. And so I work with leaders reimagining education all around the world. And I keep thinking, for kids, we learn math and science. Why don't we learn listening? And the fact that as adults, that it's such an important capacity and we don't learn it, to me, it's quite crazy. So I love that we were able to do that. And I think we need to create more spaces like that in the world.
Radha, because it's such a special class, and shout out to Tony and Brendolyn and Neil, who created such a beautiful experience for us, and we'll include this in the notes. I want to just go back and just share a few reflections, if we may, just on how important it is to listen. Because as leaders, think about the vision, think about the end in mind. What do we want for our children? Who's out there that we need to convince and persuade? How do we stand with conviction and authority? How do we navigate organizational politics? How do we're so out there, right? We're so
Yes.
out there with all of these things and we're trying to control. And yet we miss kind of the main step, which is, have we really been present enough to understand our own filters, our own coming to the table? And as much as we think we're open minded, we actually have baked in so much and we're not as flexible as we think. And if we're this unaware, I wonder how unaware we are about other people. And so it's so interesting because I feel like you and I work so much in the space of transformation and how do we get to these huge shifts in education in the world. And yet this shift, when we look internally, I'm like, do we really even, are we even aware of the things that hold us back, the things
Well,
that we're
100% Annalisa. So, you know, both of us, we're doing this work to change systems. So I always say you're trying to do this work out there to change systems, but you've got to start in here, right? So if we don't want polarization in the world, and yet with your family member or with your colleague, you're sitting there and judging them, then how is that anything going to change, right? Or if we want people to be more understanding and compassionate of one another, and our listening of ourselves is like, why did I do that again? Blaming myself, judging myself. How are we going to shift anything in the world? And I love what you said, Annalisa. Even even those of us who are doing this work, the minute you start becoming aware of this, you notice you have all of these filters, all of these listening filters. Like you're judging someone, you're judging yourself, you're saying, this is right, this is wrong. I'm better than this person, or that person is better than me. I'm not good enough, or I'm too good. And I think if we can be light and playful with recognizing that all of us have these filters, all of us have these things that are going on in our mind, and just become aware of that, then we can start doing something about it, right? Then we can start saying, all right, well, let me put that aside for a second. And all of a sudden, we can be with one another in a different way. And so I am not looking at you with my preconceived notions at you. I'm just able to be with you as you are. And the thing that I've discovered in practicing that, and it takes practice because we like our stories, we like our filters. It's easier to put ourselves and others in a box, but when you're with someone just like that, and when you're able to be with someone without filters, you can get really surprised, and in beautiful ways, right? You get to discover something about the other person that you didn't know, or all these stories you had of like, this is going to be very difficult can disappear because you're just there with that person in that moment, and you allow them to be who they are, and you allow yourself to also surprise and evolve over time.
Radha, if I were to kind of codify that as even as simplistically as we'll try to make it, first is can we be aware of our filters? And
Yes.
that's deep seated
Yes.
childhood stuff. Often it's a chip on our shoulder, the thing we're trying to prove, the hammer that we use throughout our lives to make that thing go away, whether it's I'm
Right.
not worthy, I'm not smart enough, I'm not whatever the thing enough. So
Exactly.
be aware of filter. Second is to put that aside and actually be present, ground our feet. That's something we practiced. Pause, be still, take a breath. And that's why meditation is so important to coming back to the here and now. And then lastly, can we have an intention of being a listening? And I use that as a noun that we often think like, oh, listening, a verb. I'm like, actually, it's a presence. It's a vessel. Can I be empty enough to receive you without all the preconceived notions and just have an intention to be here with you?
Beautifully, beautifully said. I think you just put it so nicely. And it sounds very simple and it takes some practice. But once you practice, it is just that simple. It's just being with one another. And I think, by the way, kids do this beautifully at a certain age. They're just with you. And so when I'm with my nieces and nephews, I learn a lot about presence because you're just there with them without any judgments and filters, um, up until a certain point. So yeah, thanks for sharing that, Annalisa.
Radha, when you're thinking about you bringing up children, you as a child, did you think that you would have this path? This you'll eventually go into a listening class, that you'd be leading this huge global initiative in education. Was that what young Radha had in store
No,
for her?
I'm laughing right now because yeah, when they ask you what do you want to be when you grow up, all you know is the things around you. I think I was 5 and I might have put bus driver because I like my bus driver, right? Like that's what you know. And then at some point it was teacher because that's all you have exposure to. And then I spent some time in hospitals because I had uncles, so maybe I'll become a doctor, right? And it's you have this very narrow window. And this was at the time that we didn't even have the internet. So you just know what's around you. But I would say a couple of things. I was always a dreamer, right? So I always had this very, very active mind. And I grew up in a very global family. You see, my parents, they grew up in East Africa. My grandparents, they grew up in India. I would spend summers, my brother, my sister, and I would sleep on mattresses in my grandmother's room in London. And so I think I just had a vision that there was something bigger in this world. And so I would always allow myself to imagine and dream. And I was always curious about people. But yes, I never imagined that I would be doing leadership work and doing this inner work. But I think the beautiful thing is now that I look back, so much of it makes sense. I was very curious. I was always interested in people. I had spiritual traditions, passed down to me by my grandmother, which maybe I didn't even notice then that I can now bring into my work. So looking backwards, a lot of it makes sense. But no, I did not have a fixed path or a dream when I was that young.
It's fascinating because as we look back, while we might not have had these dreams, it makes sense. You being a dreamer, having this pretty international background, very young,
Yes.
and then wanting to connect people, right? The inner motivations of people, unleashing potential. That's what you do today. So as much as we sometimes wonder, like, how did that happen? I'm like, oh, well, it makes a ton of sense given young Radha and your
Yeah,
experiences.
I remember when I was 12 years old, my parents had saved up money. Now we grew up in Canada, but I grew up with a very Indian background. That was my first language. You know, my twin sister and I would speak Gujarati, which is our language in class. And at that time, we would get reprimanded for teaching the other kids our own language. But I grew up very much with my Indian community and an Indian language and Indian culture and food, but in Canada. And so I remember my parents had saved up money to take us all on a trip to India when we were 12 years old. And we drove 2 to 3 hours on this dirt road, went to what felt like the middle of nowhere, and we stopped somewhere and we asked, where are we? And basically this was the rural village where my great grandparents were from. And where we were, there was no school there. There was kids running around barefoot, and they were incredible, right? They were incredibly lively and full of life. But I remember in that moment, I realized, why is it? Because I grew up in Canada, like I get to go to school, I have these opportunities, and these kids are incredible and they're full of life, but they don't have any of what I have. Now, at that point, I didn't have language, right? I didn't have language around equity or potential or anything like that. But I think that's when the seeds of something began in me that, wait, no matter where you're at, everybody's got this light within them. How do we create opportunities for everyone to shine that? And why is it that I have opportunities that others don't? And now I have more sophisticated language around it, but I think that started when I was young. So I always had these questions: why? This doesn't make any sense. And that's probably some of what brought me to the work that I do.
The transitions from childhood and then you going off to Harvard, double Harvard degrees here, and then Teach for All. I'm curious when you and I met during that Bhavana experience, and as we were trying to practice listening during the pandemic,
Yeah.
I'm curious for you, Radha. You had written this book, Brave Now, and for me, it was very inspiring
Thank you.
because you came from being really, really unwell and I think on the brink of possibly death. And
Yes.
in that really tough time, you created this beautiful piece that was about stepping into our light. It was about having these curiosities, but actually making them happen because we never
Mhm.
know. And I remember being very inspired that you were just like, let's do it. Let's let those preconceived notions of ourselves go because we only have today. And so
Right.
let's give some background here, Radha. What was going
Sure.
on in the moment? And, how did this book get birthed? Had you planned this book before? What happened?
No, and you're making me laugh because you're reminding me of something about my childhood. I'll come back to in a second. But yeah, no, so here's what happened. So about 4 years ago, peak of the pandemic, it was April 2020. I remember it vividly because I was starting to get very tired and I was on a conference call and I was about to say something and I lost my breath and I literally had to get off the phone. And we won't remember it now, but that was the point where people were talking about this new thing called COVID. So in New York City, this was the time that things were shutting down. You couldn't even get Tylenol from the pharmacies. There was no vaccine. There was no masks in the hospitals. And I got off the phone and I said, I think I have this. And then within a couple of days, I was completely bedridden. I couldn't move. I couldn't find my breath. I would barely get any sleep. I would wake up in the middle of the night. My heart would be racing 150 beats a minute. I had a good friend who was a doctor. She said, please do not come into the hospitals. We do not know what we're doing. We're making makeshift hospitals. I lost 10 pounds in 3 weeks. And finally I ended up in the hospital. Um, and they found a lesion in my brain. I mean, it was just my whole body was failing me. And, this is from being a healthy, ambitious, active person to all of a sudden my life was disrupted. And in the months that followed, I was one of those people who got long COVID. And again, there was many nights I wasn't sure if I was going to make it truly. And slowly I started to get a little bit better, but even then, going for a walk in the park for 5 minutes, I would get short of breath. When I started returning back to work, I would have to lie down every hour just to be able to make it through the day. And so everything that I had taken for granted, movement, even my mental energy, right? There was times when I couldn't read words on a page, or even when I came back to work, I could make it through about one phone call, and then I would have to lie down for 2 hours just to make it. And so everything in my life got disrupted. And so when I was going through that, I think I needed to channel my energy somehow. And so I just started writing, and I just started sharing my experiences of, here's what I'm going through, but here's how I'm getting through it. And everything that I've done to work with CEOs and social entrepreneurs, every lesson I've taught them, I had to apply that to myself just to survive. So I had to learn how to slow down. I had to learn how to reach out for help and not feel like I was a burden. I had to learn how to be compassionate with myself. I had to learn to find beauty in the small moments to be able to get me through the hard ones. And so that's how this book came to be. And I'm laughing that the story of my childhood was you. I just remember this, but when I was a kid, I used to love to write, and I wrote my first book at 8 years old, and it was about 10 pages, and it was about a family of rabbits. And then I never wrote again. And so what's funny is, in these moments, people ask me, did you plan to write a book? No. One day, it literally, half the book like flew out of me one night in the midst of pain and insomnia. And so I think it's all, oftentimes we have this stuff within us, we've suppressed it. And in that moment, I had nothing to fear. I didn't care if I looked stupid. I didn't care if what I wrote didn't sound right. I had no fear, because, as you said, Annalisa, I don't know if I was going to have another day. And so I said, let me just share what I've got with the world. And that's how this book, Brave Now, came to be. Yeah.
I love how you had written a book about rabbits, and this is like the opposite of, I'm going to step in and do it today. Because this concept of fear, because let's go there, because
Yes. Yeah.
often as leaders, right, you think, wow, Harvard, two Harvards, and amazing background, and you support leaders and CEOs, and how can you be fearful? You got it going. Like, if you're fearful, like, what does that mean for the rest of us? And yet it's more commonplace than we think. And many of us don't have the life or death situation where we don't know if we're going to make it. And that's what gets us to push to do it, because we're like, well, we can do it tomorrow. We can do it next year,
Right.
2025. Come on, like, what's another year? This idea is brewing. I need more time to brew. And so let's talk about that, Radha, because it's what would get us, like, if you boil down fear and say, okay, let's not be on the deathbed here. Let's
Sure,
be
sure,
like
right, yes.
more normal, right? We're still in COVID, but like, let's say for someone who has an idea, it could be a book, it could be a podcast, it could be an idea at work, it could be anything, proposing to someone they love, who knows what the thing is.
Yes, yeah.
But how do we overcome that uncertainty and
Yes,
truly,
right.
put ourselves out there? Because sadly, like, there's nothing, as I don't think there's anything as like a guarantee. I'm not sure if we have any guarantees.
There are no guarantees. And listen, I'm present to that every day, because even though my health has improved, I know I can relapse in any moment. And so now I do not take a single day for granted. But you're right, you don't want to have to get through a near death experience to get there. So here's what I've learned about fear. First of all, there is nothing wrong with fear. Like, I will tell you, I had a lot of fear. So for me, being brave does not mean having no fear. Of course, you're going to have fear. Every time. And if you don't, then that means maybe you're getting comfortable and you can play a bigger game in life. So I always have a little bit of fear, and that's not a bad thing. If it's too much, it can be debilitating. But if you have just a little bit of it, it can activate you. So for me, being brave is not the absence of fear. For me, being brave is just taking on each day or moment anew, putting yourself out there a little bit, try giving something a go. If you've got something within you, just remembering, we each have one life to live, and we each have a bit of light in us. And we spend so much of our time trying to conform to the rules of society, or worried about what people think about us. But that's not what we're born to do. We have something to offer. And so what I say is just go out there and do it. And what I started realizing is, what's the worst that can happen, right? I put my book out there, someone's not going to like it. so what, right? What's the big deal? And we're so afraid that we just hold ourselves back, and yet then we're hiding a piece of ourselves that we could offer something to the world. And so what I found was, it started with writing. Like I'd never put anything out there. It was, this book started because I put a piece out on social media. I never put anything. And 20,000 people read it. And people started writing and saying, this is making a difference in my life. But here's the thing, if one person had read it and I got 3 bad comments, so what? Because when you put yourself out there, you're going to have a bit of that. But so what? I got to experience something bigger. And when I started getting less afraid in one domain, I also found I got less afraid in other domains. So another thing that I discovered is now I express my love freely, like to people in my life, to family members, to coworkers if they do a good job. Like I'm not afraid of expressing myself. And what I've discovered is you build beautiful relationships. And back then that felt terrifying to do. And so I think once you start taking a leap in one area, you realize it's not so hard. And so all I would say to people is if you've got an idea, just take the first step and just give it a go, because we don't have forever and you probably have something to offer and you'll feel a bit good about it, but you're also offering something to the world. So please, please go and give it a go. Yeah.
I want to highlight a few things here, Radha. First, being brave is not the absence of fear.
Right.
Some fear is healthy because it helps us see that we are not comfortable and we're growing
Yes.
creatures, and growth is healthy. Growth is important. And so let's make sure we see that fear is a good thing in moderation, right? Not too
Right.
extreme, but in moderation. Second, I hear that fear doesn't have to be like jump off a cliff.
Right. Right. Yes.
It can be take the next baby step, wake up anew and do something that feels a little uncomfortable.
Exactly.
And the third thing I hear is when we allow ourselves to lean in, we open something new. And that newness could be relationships with people
Yes.
that we didn't even know, could be a close friend, a support, a cheerleader. It could also be a new skill that we didn't remember since we were 8 when we wrote about rabbits.
Right. Yeah.
Or it could be this new potential offering, but it's a gift to the world, even if we might have everybody think it's the best. And even like not a lot of people think it's the best. It's these are gifts that we never know who will receive them. And I think the biggest recipient actually is ourselves to stay true to
100%,
ourselves.
100%, exactly. And you look at all these, so many artists and authors in their lifetime, they were never acknowledged and they were laughed at. And yet now we read their great works of art. And so don't worry so much. And I think the last thing I would say is one of my philosophies on life now is just be playful, right? Somehow we get
Ah,
so significant, right? Like everything is so serious and so significant. And look, many of us are doing work and operating in a world where there are so many challenges. So I do not mean to dismiss that at all. And yet we've lost our ability to play. Like I just got myself a keyboard and I used to play a little bit when I was a kid, and now I'm fumbling away and I'm having some fun with it, right? Instead of being like, I have to be perfect at this. And so I think that's the other thing about, I think what holds us back is this idea that what keeps us fearful is I've got to do it right. I've got to do it perfect. And that just stops us from taking the first step. So just also have a little bit of fun with it. And so what if it's not perfect the first time around? Enjoy the process. We've lost our ability to play. So I encourage us to find it again. It's a lot more fun.
the point about being playful, I have to underscore that because yes, we're facing lots of tough stuff in life. I don't want to undermine what's going on in the world. But does it help to be like, Radha, the world sucks. It's all negative. I'm just going to put, my grim face on and just like look at all the things that are need to be improved. We need to do better. We need to bring our A+ game all the time. I mean, it's just like, does that really help to like add more gravity to a really tough situation? Or could we say, yes, it's hard, and how can I still find some joy, some positivity, some light, some way of like having myself show up each day, each moment with like some sense of optimism, some sense of
Right.
optimism. And
Right. Yeah.
that's
And
a
I think
choice.
exactly. It's a choice. It's a choice. And look, this is what I say is no one person is the same. I have friends who are activists and all they see is what's not working and what's broken. And I'm like, we need you in the world, right? To shout from the rooftops of what's not working, right? I have always been an optimist and almost it was almost like you have to be closeted about that and hide that in today's world because everybody's what's talking about what's wrong. And I'm learning, you know what? I am going to embrace that because we do need people who see the good in people, who see what's working. And actually, I think the beauty is when you can start embracing it all. Like when I build teams, I love to have diverse teams. I want to have the person who sees the problem and sees the risk. And I want to make sure that I can see the possibility that no one else can imagine. Now, if I don't judge my person and they don't judge me, then we can work incredibly well as a team and we can just be ourselves. I'm not going to force someone to be an optimist when that's not the way they see the world. And they're not going to force me to always see what's wrong, but together we can make a difference. And I think that's what I've come to realize. We need many different people who see the world in different ways. But how can we just accept different people? Because then together we can create something new. And like you said, we can also just feel more at peace because we can be exactly who we're meant to be.
And as part of being exactly who we're meant to be, it's not just these work identities. So, one thing that Radha, I got from your book is just how much we need to take care of ourselves, take care of each other. Can you talk
Yes.
about that and how that has been an evolving practice for you?
Yeah, totally. One of the things that I learned through getting sick is a couple things. The first was we are not exactly, we're not our work. And sometimes we say, I'm busy and it's a badge of honor. It's almost become kind of seen as something great. And I just discovered the opposite. When I got sick, I had to learn to slow down. I had to learn to rest in the middle of the day. I wasn't able to do the things that I was able to. I had to learn to say no to things when even I was brimming with ambition inside. And I think it was the best thing for me because I began to realize that we have to take care of ourselves and we have to rest and we shouldn't be guilty about it. And I think that's the kicker, right? I mean, initially I was guilty about it. I felt like, wait, I should be doing this, I should be doing that. But you look at high performance athletes, they build in time for practice and they build in time for rest. We need to be doing the same thing. So that's one thing I learned for caring for ourselves is give yourself permission to rest. Change your relationship with time. You may never get everything done on your to-do list for the day. That's okay. It's really okay. That's probably how 95% of us work. Let go of the guilt around that. I have a practice every week where then I look at, hey, what did I do? What did I didn't? Did I lean into my energy? And I've just learned to kind of let go of that. And then, Annalisa, one more thing that I discovered around taking care of ourselves is it's not a solo act. And so the most beautiful thing that I got out of my own illness was realizing how many incredible people I had around me. And it wasn't just one person, it was a whole group of people who showed up for me in different ways. So there was the friend who made me laugh when everything was dire. There was another friend of mine who, when I couldn't walk, would bring his dog over and we'd walk a block. And then the next day, 2 blocks. There was another colleague of mine at work who, for months on end, would send me a text every day. How are you doing? And that was the safe space I had to release at night. I mean, I have to say, I have been moved to tears by the depths of human kindness. And so I think the other thing I learned about taking care of ourselves is part of the way we take care of ourselves is allowing ourselves to receive from others. And so that was a huge, huge thing for me. Build support networks and don't think about receiving as you're being a burden on someone. Think about it as a two-way gift. And so that's another way that I just really, really believe we can take care of ourselves by just being ourselves with others, giving to them and allowing ourselves to receive.
Oh, so beautiful. One, rest, allow ourselves to let go of cramming and the status of busyhood. Second is, yes, we take care of others, but also allow ourselves to be taken care of too. It's like
Yes,
a
yeah,
beautiful relationship that
yeah.
actually can cement these friendships.
And it was a huge mindset shift for me because, when I grew up, and again, this is, and especially women and women of color, we're used to taking care of everyone and everything. And I remember in the early days, I had been pretty fiercely independent. I always had good support networks, but honestly, there was times when I felt like I was just being a burden on others because there are points, when you're at your lowest point, I really did need a lot of help, physical help just to get through the day, help from work colleagues to take on responsibilities I couldn't, emotional support when I was going through difficult days. And sometimes I felt, gosh, I'm asking more of people than I'm giving. But one thing I started doing, and again, this is because I stopped being afraid. I just started asking people, is it too much? Am I
Mm.
being a burden? And that is the scariest question to ask at some point because you really don't want to hear the answer no. But I actually became okay with the answer yes or no. And I was surprised, right? I had a doctor friend of mine who at one point is like, yes, it's all too much because this is what I'm dealing with at work. And in the beginning, I was struck like, wait, do you not care? And 2 seconds later, I'm like, wow, thank you for saying that because I've got others right now I can rely on. And maybe you need support right now. And I had other friends who I thought I was just being such a burden on, and they said, gosh, no, you're helping me feel connected with the world. And so I was able to release into that. And I didn't judge anybody. So I just learned have a lot of people around you. And if you're not sure, just ask, right? And so I've learned to have these, what could have been a very difficult conversation, and it's not at all. And because of that, the depths of my relationships are stronger, and we've just learned to communicate about things that used to be unsaid. And there's just something so beautiful about that as well.
Ah, I love that because it's you can die before you die, like have the community and the love and care while we're living instead of waiting
Exactly.
till afterwards. Radha, this has
Exactly.
been amazing. Let's do lightning round. Are you
Sure.
ready?
I'm ready.
Chocolate or vanilla?
Chocolate.
Cooking or takeout?
Cooking.
Climb a mountain or jump from a plane?
Oh, I'm not going to choose on that one. I love adventure. I'm picking both.
Have you ever worn socks with sandals?
Never. I love to go bare feet.
How would you rate your karaoke skills on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being Mariah Carey?
Oh, singing wise, three, but I'll have some fun with the group.
What's a recent book you read?
I'm just finishing this beautiful book, Anamkara, and it means soul friend, written by John Donahue, this beautiful Irish poet. I recommend it to everyone. It's about love and friendship and looking at what that means in a new way.
What's your favorite way to practice self care?
Recently, I've been going for a walk every day in the park without an agenda, and it's beautiful.
What's a good professional development you've done?
Oh gosh. Um, I just spent a week in an ashram in India where Gandhi used to live, and it was a beautiful experience because it just got me out of the space of doing, 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 and it just allowed me to be with other human beings.
What's your definition of a boss mama?
Oh gosh, a boss mama. Um, A boss mama is someone who knows the beauty and power and light within her and is unapologetic about shining it out into the world.
What advice would you give your younger self?
Oh gosh, let's see. You know what? It's the title of my book, Be Brave. Take a few risks. Get out there. Don't be afraid.
Where can we find you, like LinkedIn, anywhere else?
Yeah, you can find me LinkedIn and it's Radha.Ruparell, or you can find my book at bravenowbook.com.
And then last question, do you have a final ask, recommendation, or any parting thoughts to share?
Yeah, let's see. I would just say we can create our own lives. So if there's a rule in the world that doesn't make sense to you, challenge it and create your own way. I've created my own world and I'm having a lot of fun with it.
Oh, Radha, thank you so much for this conversation. Learned so much.
Thank you so much. You've been so fun to do this with.